January 20th, orders from executive, challenge birthright citizens, Elon starts Doge. Federal employees fired, DEI is now retired, banning transgender folks, migrants gotta go. Bishop Buddy's homily, Tepper's at the Treasury, Hegseth, Bondi, Rubio and Tulsi, Kennedy, no vaccines, Putin's got a winning team, J.D. Vance takes his stance, Ukraine got so goodbye, we didn't start the fire. It was always burning since the world's been turning. We didn't start the fire. No, we didn't light it, but we're trying to fight it. And this is just the first 5 weeks of the new administration. Billy Joel's original song spanned 40 years of events. We could sing an entire new song about just the past 40 days of what has been happening. Sometimes it does feel like an out-of-control fire, doesn't it? Other times, it feels like a fire hose. That's intentional. It's called flooding the zone. The fire hose is a tactic of authoritarian regimes. When attacks overwhelm in volume and speed, there's not enough time and human resources to organize. The fire hose confuses the public and keeps them off balance. When people are in perpetual crisis mode, it compromises their ability to think clearly because they're exhausted. When we're constantly responding to the manufactured crisis du jour, we don't see what's happening just beyond our view to undermine and dismantle our social infrastructure. Like the film title, it's Everything Everywhere All at Once. So it may seem odd when I suggest that now is the time for us to slow down and gather in groups and engage in deliberative dialogue about the church's role in a divided society. There's no time for this, some might say. We shouldn't be talking, we need to act. And then there are others who say, we shouldn't be talking about this at all. How dare you bring politics into the church, Dr. Schade? But my friends, the political realm has brought the church into this, whether we like it or not. When people in the administration accuse denominations like mine, Lutherans, of laundering money for doing the work that the government has contracted with them to do with full transparency and accountability. When ICE agents are instructed that they may now go into churches to arrest people, we don't have a choice regarding talking about politics because politics is already talking about us. Believe me, I feel a sense of urgency. But I notice within myself that sometimes the urgency turns into a kind of flailing around out of desperation with no direction. And flailing around is precisely the wrong thing to do when you're caught in a riptide. Because that's what we're in right now. Has anybody ever been caught in a riptide out in the ocean? You know what it's like, right? It's really scary. A riptide is a powerful channel of water at the beach where the water is going back out to sea. And it is so strong that it can sweep even the best swimmers out to sea, and they are at risk for drowning. Each thing that has happened since January 20th is creating a riptide of intense fear and emotions that can drag us under and pull us away from the safety of the solid emotional, physical, and spiritual ground. Lifeguards offer 5 tips for surviving a riptide. When applied to ministry in this intense and demanding time, the advice can be helpful for clergy and congregations as well. I'm going to tell you what those 5 tips are, and then I'm going to go through them. I'm going to walk through them with you. One is stay calm. Another is swim parallel to the shore. A third is float or tread water if you're tired. A fourth is follow the current when necessary. And a fifth is wave and call for help. These 5 tips overlap nicely with Jesus' teaching in his Sermon on the Plain. And they offer guidance as we prepare to engage in deliberative dialogue about the church's role in a divided society. Let's start with stay calm. When a swimmer notices that they are far from shore, they often panic. They frantically try to swim against the rip current. But what happens when you do that? You're exhausted, right? You tire yourself out. And when your body is depleted, you are at risk for drowning. The key then is to stay composed. Quell the urge to flail around and swim against the current. Instead, take a deep breath. Let's practice that. Take a deep breath. Keep your head above water and assess your options. In this story of the Sermon on the Plain, prior to gathering with his disciples and meeting with the multitude of people, Jesus spent time on the mountain praying. In fact, this is a recurring theme for Jesus throughout his ministry. He knew how to stay calm and conserve energy. He didn't always push against the current. He prayed, meditated, walked in nature, enjoyed the fellowship of his friends, and whatever else he needed to do to keep his head above water. This is exactly what we are doing now. We are taking time to worship, to pray, to take deep breaths, sing hymns, listen to poetry, and calm our nervous systems. Now, some of you may feel a little guilty about taking these 2 days away here at NTSO. I should be doing more. I need to be fighting harder, we tell ourselves. But these feelings will deplete you. So I want to encourage you to allow yourself to be in this moment for these 2 days, to stay calm and rest in this in order to prepare yourself for the next step, which is swim parallel to the shore. Rip currents are actually very narrow channels of water between the waves. So instead of swimming against the current, swimming sideways and parallel to the shore can help you get out of that rip current. Swimming at the diagonal is a way to get back to solid ground by working smarter, not harder. Jesus' teachings on the Sermon in the Plain offer a way to swim parallel to the shore. For example, the charge to love your enemies and practice nonviolence by turning the other cheek are ways to swim at a diagonal against the violence of empire that has caught them all in a riptide. I want to clarify that loving your enemies is not just rolling over and allowing evil to have its way. In fact, it's just the opposite. It's about active and resistive engagement with those who want to do harm. Jesus is drawing on the Hebrew scriptures that teach us that we must reprove, rebuke, and correct our neighbor when they are doing harmful things. Turning the other cheek, for example, wasn't about taking abuse. It was about nonviolent, non-cooperation with aggression. The same with offering one's undergarment when sued or walking an extra mile when forced into subjugation. It's about drawing attention to the aggressor and shaming them. Now, during our deliberative dialogue, we will be discussing different options for the church to swim parallel to the shore. Do we find strategic, nonviolent ways to resist oppression in a public way? Do we bring people together for dialogue to build community? Those are two options. And there's a third that has to do with tip number 3 for dealing with riptides. And that third tip is float or tread water if you're tired. If you find yourself too exhausted to swim back out of the riptide, the best thing is to lay on your back and just float until the current weakens. Once you've regained your strength and the tide dissipates, you can make your way back to shore. And this is one of the options for the church as well. Sometimes we simply need to be in worship together and rest in the presence with the Lord without pushing ourselves to do more and more all the time. Doesn't that feel what ministry is like sometimes? Just more, 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 and more. Sometimes we just need to take care of each other and make sure that everyone has their head above water. This was Jesus's vision for the beloved community in this sermon. Here I'm drawing on Wilson Dickinson's book, The Green Good News, where he points out that giving people in need and lending without expecting repayment, that was just the key to living in the village life of Jesus's time, as opposed to extractive empire that demands more and takes without giving back. In the interdependent community that Jesus wants for us, we all share, we all serve, we all host in reciprocity in order to build the social fabric. Which leads to the fourth tip, which is ride the current. Rip currents eventually dissipate. So if you're exhausted, let it carry you and then swim parallel back to shore. Now, I know this seems counterintuitive because the feelings of panic can come up quickly the further you get from shore. But no riptide lasts forever. I'm going to say that again. No riptide lasts forever. Eventually, it expends its energy on its own and no longer has the power to push you away from the shore. So sometimes you do just have to ride it out. Because here's the thing. The waves coming into shore have their own energy as well. And they can carry you back. In our dialogue today, there may be times of tension and anxiety that arise within us because we're talking about some very emotionally charged things regarding the church's role in our society. When those emotions come for you, remember to ride the current and trust that the energy will ebb and flow. We can choose to follow Jesus' vision for community life that was built around simplicity, sharing, and sustainability. His sermon calls for mutuality and generosity so that people can live together in community and everyone can flourish. And that brings us to the final tip, which is, if you are in trouble, wave and call for help. If you are struggling in the rip current, signal for help from a lifeguard or a nearby swimmer. Now, I know this is hard for clergy to hear because often we're the lifeguards. But I heard an interview with a lifeguard who said, sometimes I get in situations where I make decisions that put my life at risk, and I have to call a lifeguard to rescue the lifeguard. And this is somebody who's trained to know better. We all know better, but sometimes we make decisions and we get in trouble. So living in covenantal community means being able to rely on people to give assistance when needed. This is what Jesus envisioned for the beloved community. Give to those who ask of you, which implies the reverse. Ask from people who can help you. It's about relationships of trust, knowing that when we take care of each other, especially when one of us is caught in a riptide, that distribution of care will cycle through the community like waves that ebb and flow. Yes, we are still gonna fight the fire, but we're gonna do it the way Jesus taught us, with social practices of care to provide support for those who are in difficult times, to see those that we heard about in that poem who need to be seen, who need to be enfleshed. We are going to build up the social bonds that create trust, care, safety, and love. That's what we're going to experiment with here for these 2 days. What we're doing is countercultural. It steps away from the fire hose and refuses to flail in the riptide. As we gather for these sessions to listen and learn and dialogue and study the Bible, I pray for Jesus' vision for abundance to be in good measure, pressed down like flour that you're making a big cake with, and shaken together and running over and placed into your lap. And that measure that you give will be the measure that you get back. That is reciprocity, the ebb and flow in God's beloved community. Amen? Amen. Amen.